Now I can say this with almost 100% certainty, that when you create a program, you will run into use cases where you need to store data that can then be referenced in different parts of your code. So for example, when a user interacts with our program, we may want to collect their first name and then use their name in different parts of our code, maybe in a welcome message or a goodbye message. This is where variables come into play. We can store this information inside of a variable, and then use this variable within our code in order to reference their first name in other parts of our script, to give them more of a personal touch. In fact, this is exactly what we did in our very first program. In Python, we use the equals sign to assign a value to a variable. So if I were to type first_name equals and then Sally in single quotes, this will store the string Sally in a variable called first_name. Now you can picture the variable as being a little box, and we are placing a string object inside of it. Wherever I now reference the first_name variable, for example, if I were to type print brackets first_name, the print function is going to access the object that is stored in the variable called first_name, and we get the string Sally returned as the output. Now there are a couple of naming rules we need to consider when creating variables. Firstly, variables can't include spaces. So if I were to type first name equals Sally, when we try to run this, we get a syntax error returned, telling us we have invalid syntax. This is because we've included a space in our variable name. Secondly, variables can't include symbols, apart from the underscore. So if I were to type the £sign followed by sterling equals 15, we once again receive a syntax error, telling us there is an invalid character in identifier, i.e. we have included a symbol in our variable name, and this isn't accepted. And thirdly, variables can't begin with numbers, although we can include numbers in the variable name, just not at the start. So if I were to type out 3 times equals 10 times 3, we get a syntax error, and the error is telling us we have invalid syntax. This is because we are using a number as the first character in the variable name. Now if I change this to times_3 equals 10 times 3, when we run this, we no longer get a syntax error. Therefore I can now reference the times_3 variable in my code to bring back the result. Now once we've set a variable, that's not the end. The value stored in a variable can change. So if I type first_name to see what we have stored inside of it, you can see that we have the string Sally. If I now update the first_name variable to say Simon, when I type first_name to obtain the result stored inside of it, Simon is now stored. So let's see an example of a variable changing multiple times in the same code block. Firstly, let's assign the first_name variable to be Sally. After this line of code, we will then print the value stored inside of first name on a new line. We will then change the value assigned to the variable first_name to be Simon, and then print the value stored inside of the first_name variable. Finally, we will change the value stored in first_name to be Rachel, and once again print the value stored inside of the variable. Now here, we are using the same code line to print the value of first_name. It's identical, it's written 3 times. But because we are reassigning the value that is stored in it in between each print statement, we are getting a different result returned each time. This means that when we include variables in different parts of our code, and the value stored inside of it changes all parts of the code that references this variable. A very powerful concept that makes code extremely dynamic and repeatable. We'll be using variables extensively during this course, but to summarize where we are so far, variables can be seen as little storage boxes which can contain objects, such as strings or numeric values, and other data structures such as lists and dictionaries, which we'll observe shortly. Variables can be passed around and referenced in different parts of our code. There are some instances where variables can't be used in all parts of your code, as it depends on where you define them, but we'll explore this later in the course when we talk about variable scope. Variables, as we saw, can also be updated, so a fundamental feature to understand that enables us to create some very dynamic programs.